Oh, I need to unmute myself. Muted myself. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'll tell you where I am. I have moved. Normally, I broadcast from the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam. But I have moved house for a year, actually, and I'm now on the unceded territory of the Nanaimo people. So if you're curious, that's a little bit north of Victoria, British Columbia, on a tiny little island called Mudge. Of course, named after some white British guy who was a second in command on some boat. So I think there has been some research done, and I think locals said that this island didn't have a particular name, but it has a really fascinating history in and of itself. So today's a little bit different. Those of you who've been, could I say, if you are out there listening in, I always like to do a little bit of a check-in and say, please comment, tell us you're here, tell us you can hear me, that I got everything running right, because that's always a question. Never sure that that's going to be the case. And tell us where you're tuning in from. Two of our guests are from Toronto, so I'm hoping some Toronto folks are joining us today. So the more I do this, I'm a little bit concerned because I'm not seeing any. Oh, it says there's an error loading comments. So I'm just gonna, you know what I'm gonna do? I have actually I checked earlier. I have my other computer over here, so I can just check and make sure it's happening. And I want to do that because I want to make sure everybody can see what I've set myself up right here for you. Yeah, I don't know why it's having. Normally I see folks' comments and I'm a little alarmed that it says there was an error loading comments, because I really like the back and forth that we can have. Oh, there we go. Ah, Nancy, I'm here. I'm queer. I'm not going shopping. Okay, great. Oh, in Norway. We have someone listening in from Norway. That's wonderful. So welcome. So good to have you here. I'm so relieved I can see your comments, because I love to see who's out there. It's just great. And ET and Nanaimo, thanks. And Marilyn from Victoria, wonderful. Okay, thank you. Keep your comments and your hellos, your greetings pouring in, and please throughout today's talk, if you have questions or comments, just throw them up there. We really want to engage with you. So I'm okay. So today is really, I feel like what I do as a professor, I'm kind of doing today. So as most of you know, I'm a historian at Simon Fraser University, where I work on the history of sexuality. And in the past 5 years, I've been paying a lot more attention to history of Black feminism, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, and also Indigenous history. Because in Canada in particular, we've been paying a lot of attention to the history of colonialism here, which as a Canadian historian, we've always paid attention to. But what's really exciting is the kind of conversation we're having, and the content of that conversation is really changing. And it's really exciting to be a part of that, and hopefully to contribute in a good way to doing that work. And so what happens when I'm lecturing is, because I lecture on 20th century history, it's kind of easy to do this, although I suspect it's probably easy for people who lecture on different periods. But I usually am very responsive to what's happening in the news. So I almost always begin my lectures with something that's happened recently. And I am able to tie it into no matter what I'm teaching. I mean, it's kind of uncanny, really, and sometimes sad, because some things seem to never change. So this week, what I've been doing with this live stream is bringing to you this exhibit that we did. And in a way, that's not really changed. So a lot of the women coming on today, one of them, Barbara Finley, who's actually part of the exhibit, we're all white feminists who have grappled with the issue of racism. And it's not been an easy go for white feminists, and within the feminist community and the lesbian community. We haven't done as, that's terrible. We haven't done as well as we should. But there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to think about, but there's a lot of really, really excellent work that's going on out there too. Now, as a teacher, I know my students, it's very interesting to see how they've shifted over time. So when I first started at SFU in 2004, talking about Indigenous history, students would say ridiculous things like, education's free, they don't pay any taxes, all that kind of malarkey. And the students in my classrooms, at least today, are really, really different. They are very passionate about change. But as settlers, the students that I have who are settlers, which is the vast majority, they just don't know how to start, and they're frozen in fear that they're going to fuck up, that they're going to say something stupid, they're going to get it wrong, that it's not their place. And actually, and here's that connects this conversation with the folks who I have on today. We've been doing work on campus around integrating Indigenous knowledge and the decolonization critique into the curriculum. And again, a lot of settler profs are super uneasy about doing it for all the same reasons my young students are, right? So even people who years in the classroom, tons of intellectual expertise, just there's so much discomfort. And it's so important that we get over that. So a great conversation I had, which I find is really inspiring, was with a young Haida student at SFU who I was telling him about my frustration with my white colleagues or my settler colleagues who are uneasy about doing this work. And his immediate comment was, well, that's privileged, isn't it? It's a privilege for you to choose not to talk about it. That's a choice I don't have. And that really put it in terms I could relate to. And I have to say, I have weaponized that comment against my friends on occasion to try and help them overcome their own misgivings and realize that, you will fuck up. We will all fuck up. But, and it's a very vulnerable place to be in. But it's, as we all know, it's absolutely nothing like the vulnerability that people of color, Black people, Indigenous people are in every single day. So I remind myself of that constantly to do this work. So it was great to be able to pivot today away from the exhibit itself and to use this space and the tiny little bit of technological expertise I've developed in running this to have this conversation. So I have intentionally invited, I am a white lesbian, I have intentionally invited other white lesbians to be part of this conversation. So I just want to for a second say why. Because there are so many reasons, but people of color and Indigenous people have been calling on us to step up and do this work, not put all the labor on them. And this is definitely not there is a time and place in which their voices need to be centered. Their voices are being centered. We can all listen to those voices if we want to. They're out there, not hard to find. And I'm going to share a couple of them in just a minute. But there's a place for us to come forward and say, here's how I have done the work. And so my intention and my hope here is to share with you 3 people who I think are remarkable. And I know right now they don't want me to call them remarkable because they just they want to be in the background. And I get that, but they are remarkable women. These are women who paved the path for me as a young queer feminist. And so I value them greatly. And I'm really appreciative of them being willing to come on and have this conversation, because I think we all feel, well, to be honest, I don't, because I take up this space. I'm just being honest. I hope that didn't come off the wrong way. But a lot of people feel very uneasy taking up this space right now. But me, I think it's so important that we step in and as I try to do for my students, role model for people. And I think we can all use that help. And I find it gives me courage when Robin DiAngelo, who wrote that book, White Fragility, she came to our campus, and boy, that gave me so much courage, her talk. Like, it just really helped me in so many ways move forward in this. So my hope today is that that's what this conversation does, that it gives all of us courage, the courage we need, and the language, the tools that we need to move forward in this moment. So I'm going to tell a little bit of a story about where my thinking is going, and then I'm going to play two videos for you, and sort of set up this conversation the way, if I was in class, the way I would set it up for my students. And I hope it works. I hope it's setting us up for the conversation that we're going to have, and then I'm going to invite my guests to kind of come in and then sort of pick up there and then tell us their story, which will be different, or maybe there'll be some similarities, I don't know, to my story. Okay, so I have really good news, which is that I won a prize this week, a national prize for this article that I published last year. And I'll just read it out because my guests can't see what I'm showing you, which is, it's an article. It's called Love Politics, Lesbian Wedding Practices in Canada and the United States from the 20s to the 70s. And I don't want to get into it too much, but basically I needed a way to talk about, I'm writing a book about same-sex marriage, which is a huge topic. And I needed a way to talk about why people were having marriage ceremonies in the 50s, 60s, and 70s if they were queer. Why would they do this very heterosexual thing if they were queer? And I started reading a lot of Black feminist literature, excuse me. And I came across this article by Jennifer Nash. So I'm showing you now Jennifer Nash's homepage and a book that just came out last year. And she developed this concept of love politics. So her argument is that love is a political practice. So in our culture, we don't see love as a political practice. So here is just this, now I'm showing just a part of a paragraph from my article where I summarize what she says. So she examines second wave American Black feminist discourses about love put forward by writers like Alice Walker, poet June Jordan, and Zozake Shang, who actually, I think she just died last year, which is very, very sad, a great loss for all of us. So she argues, by theorizing love, they transformed the personal into a theory of justice. And she says, continues, love politics as practiced by Black feminists in America represent, quote, a significant call for ordering the self and transcending the self, a strategy for remaking the self and for moving beyond the limitations of selfhood, for producing new forms of political communities as a kind of affective politics. So it's a bit high theory, but basically what she's saying is she has this quote, I think at one point in an article, about how just getting out of bed in the morning is a political practice if you're Black in America. Right. And I think that applies to a lot of other people, too. And so you have to learn to love yourself. And in your ability to love yourself, you can love the community. And that it's that love that sustains people and enables them to get up and get out of bed and face another day. So it was a really just a marvelous piece of scholarship that I was able to use. So I just wanted to put that forward because I'm really, really interested in love, and I've really connected with that through this work that I'm doing. So now I'm going to play these two video clips. So the first one is Cory Booker, who was on Stephen Colbert last night. And Stephen Colbert had just asked him about, is it Paul Rand, who had voted against the anti-lynching bill. So that's the conversation Stephen Colbert is having with him. And this is Cory's reply.
This is to make this, King said something, and this is the problem. You want an enemy, right? People want an enemy. And I'm telling you right now, it's not that. King said it so eloquently when his life was getting death threats, when his bomb threats, when people like Fred Shuttlesworth were being stabbed and bombed, when girls were dying in churches. We want to blame the white supremacists. They still exist. They want to blame people with hate in their hearts. Yeah, but that's not the majority of us. King warned us that what we have to repent for is not the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people simply, but the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And so I'm hoping that this is a period of America where we somehow come to a deeper love, where our circles of empathy expand, when we begin to realize what is not just a quaint ideal that we are one nation under God, indivisible. No, that is an inescapable truth. And if we ignore it, we ignore it at our own peril, and we're seeing the results of it right now. And so I don't want to direct ire. Donald Trump wants to make this all about him. It's not. This season of America is not a referendum on him, or this is a referendum on us, on who we are and who we're going to be to each other. Will we be a nation of love? And I'm sorry, that sounds like sentiment or sentimentality or saccharine, but God, that word, it's sacrifice, it's service, it's struggle. It's saying what happens to you affects me, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If we, this great experiment, the most heterogeneous democracy on the planet Earth, if we can show that we can make our ideals more than just our slogans and our songs, but to live deep into the fiber and the fabric of this country so that all of us experience the same opportunity, the same justice, the same brother and sisterhood, then we succeed as a nation. But right now we're struggling, and I'm hoping that out of this struggle and out of this hurt in this country right now grows a new harvest of hope. I really do, but we can make real change in this country.
I accept what you say, that this is not about Donald Trump, this is about us, but don't a nation...
It's so interesting. Stephen Colbert then goes on to try and make it about Donald Trump. It's like, anyhow. Okay, so that's the video I wanted to start with. But based on my experience teaching my students, so I think his message is really important. And there he goes to what I think Jennifer Nash is talking about, a love politics, which is it's just astounding to me that people in in any moment can hold that kind of love. Anyways, okay, so that's where it is, right? But the problem that can arise that I've seen amongst other settlers and white folks is to go from that to like this kind of kumbaya. Yes, I love everybody equally. There is no color. We're all the same. But there has to be, the love, in my opinion, has to be accompanied by a deep critical understanding of the structural inequalities that exist. So you don't love for the lack of difference. You love with a deep understanding of the difference, right? What the differences have produced. Okay, so I'm going to segue to a very, very different video, but the argument I want to build here is that we need to, in my opinion, hold Corey's argument, Martin Luther King's argument, at the same time as we sit with and hold the arguments that this person, Kimberly Jones, who I just discovered last night on Twitter, that's a Twitter share. So I'm just going to play that video now.
Now, people are like, well, what did you gain? Well, what did you get from looting? I think that as long as we're focusing on the what, we're not focusing on the why. And that's my issue with that. As long as we're focusing on what they're doing, we're not focusing on why they're doing. And some people are like, well, those aren't people who are legitimately angry about what's happening. Those are people who just want to get stuff. Okay, well then, let's go with that. Let's say that's what it is. Let's ask ourselves why in this country in 2020, the financial gap between poor blacks and the rest of the world is at such a distance that people feel like their only hope and only opportunity to get some of the things that we flaunt and flash in front of them all the time is to walk through a broken glass window and get it. That they are so hopeless that getting that necklace, getting that TV, getting that change, getting that bed, getting that phone, whatever it is that they're going to get, is that in that moment when the riots happen and if they present an opportunity of looting, that's their only opportunity to get it. We need to be questioning that why. Why are people that poor? Why are people that broke? Why are people that food insecure, that clothing insecure, that they feel like their only shot that they are shooting their shot by walking through a broken glass window to get what they need. And then people want to talk about, well, there's plenty of people who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and got it on their own. Why can't they do that? Let me explain to you something about economics in America. And I'm so glad that as a child, I got an opportunity to spend time at Push where they taught me this, is that we must never forget that economics was the reason that black people were brought to this country. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Do you understand that? That's what we came to do. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Now, if I right now decided that I wanted to play Monopoly with you, and for 400 rounds of playing Monopoly, I didn't allow you to have any money, I didn't allow you to have anything on the board, I didn't allow for you to have anything. And then we played another 50 rounds of Monopoly, and everything that you gained and you earned while you were playing that round of Monopoly was taken from you. That was Tulsa, that was Rosewood. Those are places where we built black economic wealth, where we were self-sufficient, where we owned our stores, where we owned our property, and they burned them to the ground. So that's 450 years. So for 400 rounds of Monopoly, you don't get to play at all. Not only do you not get to play, you have to play on the behalf of the person that you're playing against. You have to play and make money and earn wealth for them, and then you have to turn it over to them. So then for 50 years, you finally get a little bit and you're allowed to play. And every time that they don't like the way that you're playing, or that you're catching up, or that you're doing something to be self-sufficient, they burn your game. They burn your cards. They burn your Monopoly money. And then finally at the release and the onset of that, they allow you to play and they say, okay, now you catch up. Now at this point, the only way you're going to catch up in the game is if the person shares the wealth, correct? But what if every time you share the wealth, then there's psychological warfare against you to say, oh, you're an equal opportunity hire. So if I played 400 rounds of Monopoly with you and I had to play and give you every dime that I made, and then for 50 years, every time that I played, if you didn't like what I did, you got to burn it like they did in Tulsa and like they did in Rosewood, how can you win? How can you win? You can't win. The game is fixed. So when they say, why do you burn down the community? Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything. Trevor Noah said it so beautifully last night. There's a social contract that we all have, that if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us. So the social contract is broken. And if the social contract is broken, why the fuck do I give a shit about burning the fucking Football Hall of Fame, about burning a fucking Target? You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets and didn't give a fuck. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth. You broke the contract when we built our wealth again on our own by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. When we built it in Rosewood and you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contract, so fuck your Target. Fuck your Hall of Fame. As far as I'm concerned, they could burn this bitch to the ground. And it still wouldn't be enough. And they are lucky that what black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
Okay, so yeah, so that's how I teach. I once called my teaching method shock and awe. That's such a powerful, that, it sums it up, right? Like that just, it says so much. It just says, I mean, I think it says everything. Of course it doesn't say everything, but it just says so much. And she just puts it so succinctly. So why I put those two videos together, there's so many reasons why. I think there's the stereotype of the angry black woman. And we as white people sit so uncomfortably with Black people's anger, you know? So we have to learn. There's a comment that in her book, White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo talks about increasing our racial stamina that, as white people. So we need to learn how to sit with that anger, how and be comfortable with it. And I think love, for me, I think love is so powerful and so important because for me, at least for years, I ran on the fuel of just social justice. But now that I've dropped down into love, it's a very, very different experience. So that's actually a good time to connect with our guests here. So, but I did promise to set them up with a quote. So I will share now that quote. So here's this cartoon that I put out to promote today's talk. So it's New York from the New Yorker, and it's a white person struggling to climb up a mountain, and a younger Black person with a backpack saying, actually, we're just getting started. And they're on a plateau between recognizing racism and doing something about it. So, you know, I like this. I thought this was a great prompt for us, right? That it doesn't stop with the recognition. You know, I mean, I guess there's lots of different ways you can read it, but it doesn't stop with the recognition, right? That's just the beginning, right? And it's hard work, but that's okay. We're here for a long time, we hope. So, you know, you got to start somewhere, right? Okay. So here's the quote that I wanted to share. And it says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And I shared this, as I explained to my guest today, I used this quote with my class because I taught a whole semester course on the final report of the murdered and missing Indigenous girls and women. And at the end of the class, one of my top students said, in a very authentic way, I just want to help. You know, she's a settler. And in that moment, I felt like I had really failed because it felt like there was still a kind of white savior thing and a sense of difference, right? Like me over here with my privilege. And it's great that we're sensitive and self-aware of our privilege, but it creates this feeling of distance. And so I shared this quote with my students because I feel like we have to work in a different way. It's not about helping. And so I'm hoping that my guest today can help me draw out exactly what is meant here and how they themselves have experienced it. However, no, I know. So people are saying the quote is by Lila Watson, but actually Lila has said she doesn't want to be credited with this quote. She wants it to be credited to Aboriginal activist group Queensland 1970s because she feels it came out of the work they did together and not herself. So that's why that's the attribution, because that's just so you know, because that's the attribution she's asked for it to be given. Okay, so I'm now bringing on my three guests and I'll introduce them all. And yeah, so first appearing, I don't know, right beside me is Rachel Epstein. She is a Jewish, queer, social justice activist, researcher, and writer, originally from Vancouver. Currently the executive director of the United Jewish People's Order in Toronto, which is a secular organization that works toward racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice. Hi, Rachel. Thanks for coming. It's great to see you. And great to get to know you a little bit better. You've always kind of been in my orbit, but we've never really had a chance to talk too much. So this is wonderful. Right below Rachel is Amy Gottlieb, who is why I know Rachel. Very, very longtime friend of mine. She is a Jewish butch lesbian and lifelong activist in lesbian, feminist, and Palestine solidarity organizing. One of her recent projects is to help build Rise Up, an extraordinary digital archive of feminist activism in Canada. I think it's just Canada, right? Focusing on Canada, Amy, is that right? Yeah. And I encourage everybody to go check it out. It's amazing. You will get lost for hours in there. Almost as good as cat videos. um, and she also does video and photo based artwork that explores the intersections of personal and historical memories. And you can find them on her website, amygottlieb.ca. And then right below me, although never below me, is Barbara Finley. Barbara is a fat, old, white, cisgender, queer lawyer with disabilities, raised working class and Christian in Regina. Hi, Barbara. So I really appreciate all of you coming. Thank you so much for being here. And I'll just remind everybody who's listening in today that please feel free to make comments or ask questions as we go along. We hope this conversation is it's it would be lovely if we could all be in a room together. So hopefully by using the comment box we can sort of reproduce that a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I gave you this prompt of this quote to respond to, but I talked about a lot of different things, so I'll just open it up and see where where you'd like to jump in. Rachel, would you like to go first? Okay, great.
Are both very, very powerful. Even though we couldn't see the video, we could hear, and those were very, very powerful things that we heard. I guess for me, I have been reflecting a lot over the last days, as we all have. I think we've been thinking a lot about racism and anti-racism and what is our responsibility as white people, et cetera. And I've been thinking a lot about my early years of sort of how did I come to understand racism in a real way. And I was fortunate in that I grew up in a family that was all about social justice. I grew up with parents who were activists. And so I feel like I kind of had instilled in me a real kind of nose for injustice. Um, and when I think about that quote, I think it's partly that injustice wherever I see it hurts me, right? And Amy and I were talking earlier about the ways that all forms of injustice are kind of intertwined. But where I really learned about how racism works is when I was involved with an anti-racist organization. It was like I was a teenager. That was my first political work. But when I was 19, I became involved with women who were coming into Canada on temporary employment visas from the Caribbean and from the Philippines, first from the Caribbean and then later from the Philippines, as live-in domestic workers. And just through a set of circumstances, I got introduced to some women and came to know them and came to hear about what was happening in their lives. And then I started to accompany them at times to immigration where they were. So these were women who most of the time were leaving their own children at home to come to work in Canada in the homes of wealthy Canadians, to take care of other people's children, to do housework, and were incredibly exploited. And I won't tell all, so many stories of what was happening, and extremely vulnerable because their status in Canada was tied to an employment visa and having a particular job. And sometimes those jobs were actually there, sometimes they weren't. But it was an incredibly exploitative situation that continues to today, we should mention. So I started to accompany people to the immigration office. And, I don't know if you know, in government offices, there's little dividers, right? But you can hear what's going on all over the place. And so I saw what was happening with the people I was with, but I also heard what happened in immigration offices in general and saw how people were dehumanized, saw the disrespect, saw the disregard, saw the violence, saw the abuse that happens in the name of immigration, and the discretion that individual immigration officers had. And it was in that experience, and that actually then turned into, for me, a 10-year commitment to working on these issues of migrant workers, particularly domestic workers. And then also we worked with farm workers also in the Lower Mainland in British Columbia, where we you know, we lobbied for labor and basic employment standards. We got some money to create legal materials. We became part of a campaign to get landed status for people. But what's interesting for me, I mean, there's lots of things embedded in that experience, but one of the things that is really interesting to me is how naive I was. Like, I was young, I was 19. The first meeting that we had was in the basement of my parents' house where I was living. And I still have photographs of that meeting. We're talking 40 something years ago. And I just was like appalled by what I was seeing and witnessing and what was happening to these women who I deeply cared about. And so I just did stuff, right? I didn't think about, should I be doing this as a white woman? What is my role in this? Is this right? Is this wrong? Is this, you know, like, as I probably would do now, right? I would agonize way more now than I did then. But at the time, it was like I saw injustice and I had to act. And I kind of admire my younger self for that, and that sense of, I'm going to do it and whatever, and maybe I'll make mistakes and maybe it won't be perfect. And one of the quotes that's been in my mind in the last while was from one of the websites you put up on your feed there, from Rachel Cargill, is read alongside imperfect action. And I'm sure I made a million mistakes. I'm sure what I did and what all of us together did, you know, was imperfect. But we made some change, right? And of course, was it long lasting change? You know, things are going back now. So anyway, I feel like when I look back on that whole experience, there's a lesson for me in it, in terms of just act, just do it, right? And when you have that sense of rage and injustice and fuck, this is not right, then just do something.
Mm-hmm.
I'll stop there. I'll let somebody else talk.
Amy?
I guess I first need to say that it's hard, but it's important to hear the rage of Kimberly Jones. And it, you know, it feels like I'm vibrating when I listen to that, and I find it very difficult, because I feel like I've been vibrating with a lot of rage and grief and tears, and those are not to be shared with everybody. But I do feel comfortable talking about it. In terms of the quote, no, I'll in terms of Cory Booker, I think his point is a really good one, and I do feel like, for me, a lot of the teaching, a lot of the learning that I've done particularly within the feminist movement, but also just generally as an activist and as a high school teacher. A lot of the work of people that have taught me has been out of love and incredible amount of generosity. And I think back to when I grew up similarly to Rachel in a household that was steeped in social justice. Both of my parents were in the Communist Party, and we were out on demonstrations all the time. And I remember when I was 11, making the choice myself to go on a civil rights demonstration that marched through Harlem. And I think back to that time, and I think, I was doing a good thing, and I was being a good person, but I didn't really understand how I, as a white person, was sort of implicated in the system of racism. And so that, for me, was something that came later. And it came later in this, what I call my elevator story. The first time I was challenged as a feminist, in terms of working on a feminist publication, the lesbian issue of a feminist publication, 1983, and I'm get into an elevator in the institution where I am at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. And I tell the person who I know and who's in the elevator, she says, "What are you doing here?" And I say, "I'm doing a lesbian issue of resources for feminist research." And she says, "Oh, who are the women of color who are involved?" She's a South Asian woman who's questioning me, and I just stopped because I couldn't tell her who, because I didn't know, because I was so ignorant, because and so where did I go from there? I went to, feelings of shame and all and feelings like I'd fucked up and all of that. And I see her as being somebody who was being incredibly loving and generous to me in asking me that question, right? And as I still know her, and later, I would see her and we would talk. It wasn't like, she cut me out. She didn't need to do any of that, right? So that's where, I see love and generosity. And that's where I see, we are going to make mistakes. I think it was Barbara Wilson who has this quote about, when you make a racist mistake, it's sort of like, you got somebody's telling you got a booger hanging out of your nose, right? So it's not the end of the world. You need to take it seriously. Yes, take something and wipe your nose. Make sure when you go out and that there's no booger hanging out of your nose. But you know what? That's gonna happen, right? So we've all got all white people have boogers hanging out of their noses. We need to wipe our noses and we need to move on as much as possible. So for me, I feel like all these struggles are very intimately connected. My liberation as a woman, my liberation as a lesbian, my liberation as a person in this world who, is an artist and an activist is bound up with everybody else's. I do not want to live in a world where some people are dehumanized and other people are humanized, where some people are seen as good and can reach their potential, and other people, from the day they're born, their story is one of dehumanization in one form or another. So, that's where I see, that's my response to the quote that has been attributed to Watson that I had on my office door as a teacher, my office bulletin board for years as a teacher, largely because I wanted other teachers to see it and have a conversation with them about that.
Thanks, Amy. How about you, Barbara?
I'm going to tell a story and then I'm going to talk about helping. Like many people of my age, women of my age at least, I hit feminism. I actually hit feminism, Marxism, and Dorothy Smith all at the same moment. And that shaped my life forever. And feminism gave me a way of understanding my own situation, and the way in which I was being treated was not about who I individually was. But the fact that I'd been locked up in the nut house was not about me. It was about what they did to lesbians and so on. It was an incredibly liberatory rush of a moment. And it was a rush and it was a moment. That was in 1970. In 1984, I went to an unlearning racism workshop that was done by Gloria Yamato. It was a Black US facilitator. And at that workshop, the penny dropped. It was an equally illuminating experience in all of the same ways. It transformed in an instant how I saw absolutely everything. Only this time, instead of being one of the people victimized by the oppression I was learning about, I was one of the people who was creating the oppression that I was talking about. So I was both like amazed at the difference in the understanding that I mean, it really was one of those penny dropping experiences, and horrified at my unwittingness up until then. We formed a group out of that workshop called Aware, which was the Alliance of Women Against Racism, etc. The etc. being about all of the interconnected oppressions. And we did hundreds of unlearning oppression workshops here, always with a white facilitator and a co-facilitator who is a woman of color. And one of the things that we talked about was, what does it mean? What is helping about actually? And here's the thing about helping. Implicit in the idea of helping is that you, the helper, know better than the helpee what is good for the helpee. Now, that would be the very quintessential definition of perpetuating oppression, right there. So, any idea that you had that helping would be helpful, you could give that part up now, because it is not. It is a practice that has only one outcome, and that is to make the helper feel better. So it is much, 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 much more difficult to stand with, not to do, not to. The other thing about being a helper is there is an implied superiority, because the knowledge of the helper is superior to the knowledge of the helpee. So you are also, by suggesting that you should help, you are communicating the idea that the helpee is not going to be able to figure it out for themselves. So are these really the lessons that we want for liberation? Not quite, not at all. I mean, so for me, the alternative involves, first of all, doing a kind of I don't know, a cartography of ignorance, because one of the things about the way racism or any oppression works is that we are systematically denied, we are systematically taught white supremacy. I have 11 years of university education. I realized with rage that in all of those years, I had never encountered the racist history of Canada, even though I studied social sciences and law. That is unbelievably an incredible indictment. And it also is an instant demonstration of how racism gets maintained, because that's how we all are trained, and then how we replicate that training. Um, so I say we should do a cartography of ignorance, which means take a look at, first of all, who's in your friendship circle. Do they all happen to be white people? Who are you reading? Do they all happen to be white authors? What are, like, literally, because working against that systemic and deliberately created ignorance means we actually actively have to go and do things that we are not it's kind of not the sort of things that would occur to us, I guess, in the kind of go meet with a bunch of folks you know to do something that you think is going to be a good thing. I have another little story, which is in 1992, we were doing the Pan-Canadian Queer Conference. The organizing was done by a bunch of white dykes. Lo and behold, what a surprise. And at that meeting, we agreed among ourselves that having a group of white dykes was not perfect. We wanted to have other people of color involved with us. And we agreed we would all go out and talk to people of color we knew and invite them. Being inclusive, and inclusion is a really bad word, by the way. So when we came back to the next meeting, nobody had done that because everybody was afraid to talk to people of color, all of us. That being the problem, we recognize that as the problem is. So what we did was this, we said, okay, we are going to offer to dykes of color, queers of color, that we will do the scut work and they can do the panels and pick the people and do and create the content and have be the fronts people for that. And that moment, that organizing moment, produced the best conference I've ever been at.
Hmm.
Because we literally, I mean, we didn't, first of all, it showed us that inclusion was the wrong model. And it gave us like the brilliant idea of, okay, what we need to do is step back and support other folk. And so lots of things. For example, the word vulnerable locates the faults in the individual. The word marginalized, on the other hand, locates the oppression with the systems that do the marginalizing. So all of our language, one of the most interesting words to watch for is how people use the word we. Because who is included in the we, and by necessary implication, who is unincluded, I mean, who's in the they, that is the corresponding part of the we, is really, really an interesting thing to me. So I find this work endlessly inspiring and interesting and important.
Mm. And of course, in Canada, we have our own narrative um, of kindness to overcome as well, right? Like that's something that we're always up against too. Which, and there's been a lot of good publications over the years, but again, we're seeing that again challenging that idea of the nice Canadian.
I remember just talking about language, Barb, and you were talking about white supremacy, because I remember hearing people use the term white supremacy. And again, like you, I grew, I was educated, lots of years of education, but never learned the history of racism in Canada. I guess I learned it in anti-racist organizations. That's where I learned it. But when I would hear white supremacy and I would think, oh, that's a bit exaggerated. Like it was like a Canadian response, right? It was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's a bit exaggerated, right? And now I think, how could I think that? And we see, I mean, in this moment right now, we are seeing white supremacy at its best, right? And so it's just interesting to see how you evolve, right? And how your thinking evolves, and now I look back on that and wonder how I could have thought that. In the same way that, like, or in the last few weeks, I've been reading a lot, I've been watching movies, I've been listening, I've been and the demands around defunding the police and abolition of the prison system and mass incarceration. I knew about those things. Like I knew, they were part of my vernacular. They were part of but now I know them better. Right? And now I feel like I know them deeper, and I get why we have to defund the police. I don't think I would have understood that so much like a few months ago. And maybe I'm just, a slow learner. But I feel like this moment has pushed me, and I guess what it's teaching me is there's always stuff to learn, right? And we think we know and we don't know. And we have to keep learning and keep learning and keep learning and keep understanding. And I feel like my practice will change as a result of just the last few weeks.
I'm constantly, every second of every day these weeks, I feel like I was active before I was conscious before, I was empathetic before, I took action before, but not enough. And it's like I was aware of what was going on in terms of challenges to the Toronto Police Service. I was aware when Desmond Cole would go and gather people to go to the Toronto Police Services Board to complain, and in any number of occasions around the treatment, the brutality towards Black lives, Black bodies by the Toronto Police Service. And I knew about the defunding, as Rachel was saying, the demand for defunding, and yet I didn't act. And I'm thinking, like, did it seem outlandish? Did it seem like, oh, that's way too, like, we're never going to get there? Now, I feel like there's actually some traction. There are people who are like, well, actually, that sounds like a really good idea. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, let's definitely, let's figure out what we actually need the police for. And we definitely don't need the police to be doing work around mental health and people who are having mental health struggles. We don't need the police in marginalized communities so that, when they profile and harass and brutalize, racialized folks. We don't need that. What do we need, right? And have, like, the money should go to those communities that are those that are suffering, right? And so, anyway, I just think that the times have changed, and we have been called, and it's it's not that we haven't been called on before
Mhm.
as white people to be active. We have been many, 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 many times, but now I think it's really time to answer in a way, and to stand up and to do it, like, for real, and to gather around all those people. I've been having numerous conversations with neighbors just because I'm more connected to them around COVID-19, and we've been doing this support for frontline workers, and
Hmm.
people who I've never ever had these conversations with. We're having conversations. I'm telling them, watch this, listen to this, that sort of thing. But I also want to talk a little bit about something that Barbara was talking about, which sounded to me a lot like the ways in which we live very segregated lives, and about how sometimes at work, or in other contexts in our communities where we live, in our housing co-ops, where whatever our situation, we have an opportunity, and I to step outside of that segregation in terms of friendship groupings, in terms of who we work with, and all of that. And my experience as a teacher was one of the places for those 18 years where I did a lot of learning around racism. And it was because I had a colleague in my department, in the art department, and she and I, right from the beginning, hit it off. She was Black, I was white and queer. We were, comrades in arms. And right from the beginnings. And she always said, you came with your Amy lens. What did she mean? She meant I came with a social justice lens. And she appreciated that. What she came with was an incredible understanding as a Black teacher of the ways in which the system was racist to its core.
Mm.
And so what I was able to do, thankfully, because she was so generous in helping me to see, right, not only how over scrutinized and under respected she was, but also the ways in which the Black students in our school and in our board were suffering. They were streamed into, classes, non-academic classes. They were arbitrarily punished. They were feared. The way that staff talked about the Black students when they would gather in the hallway, it was like, it was, I almost found it unbelievable. And yet I came to understand that that was part of the whole culture of the school: control, surveil, all the Black bodies in the school, right? And I came to see this through her eyes, and for me that was very important because it meant that I changed how I was able to relate to my Black students. And I'll just use this one little story. I had a Black student in my photography class, grade 10 photography. He was really tuned out. He was disruptive. He talked in class all the time. And despite the fact that I took him aside after class and spoke with him about, how I needed him to either be there and pay attention and do the work, or else he should transfer to another class. I really wanted to help him, to support him in whatever way I could, etc. He continued to be disruptive. So I talked with my colleague, whom I had this close relationship with, and I said, I don't want to send him to the office because I know what's going to happen if I send him to the office. It's going to get completely blown out of proportion. I don't know, he's going to, I could see it. Like I could see it in my mind. I could see he was going to end up being suspended even for something that was not anything he should be suspended for. They were not going to deal with what the issues were, right? Why he's alienated, why he's so cynical, why he doesn't feel involved, whatever those feelings were. I wasn't going to send him to guidance for the same reason. He's going to talk with white guidance, counselors or white administrators. No. So she said, talk to this child and youth worker who was a young Black woman. And I did. And she got me and the student together. And she said, Miss Gottlieb has something to tell you. She says, pointing to me and speaking to the student. And I told him what I had to tell him. And he felt supported. He had an advocate, right? He had an advocate probably, maybe for the first time in that high school, I was so thankful. So, he said his piece. I said my piece. He said he was sorry. I said I didn't need an apology. I just needed something to change. He came back into the class the next day. He actually got the credit. I actually remember photographs that he took. From that point on until, in the rest of grade 10, 11, and 12, he would come by my classroom and say hello to me when he passed by, and we would converse about how things were going. She taught me, the child and youth worker and my colleague taught me a different way of being, a way of being that, I would have told you I was, not an agent of a racist system. I would have told you all sorts of things, but I didn't know how to do it. And so for me, that was a real teaching moment for me that I carried through all of my time, in teaching and in doing work with teachers as well, which she and I did, colleague and myself did. Joy and I did a lot of work, a lot of education with the teachers in our school, because we mostly found that they were the problem. It wasn't the students. It was the teachers and all of the values that they brought into the school, which were mostly very ignorant. Not entirely, but they had not figured out how to fight a racist system and how to deal with their students in a very different way, not a punitive way, not a way of like, I'm the authority and you're not, not in a way that got their students into trouble, but a way that actually brought love to their students.
I do think that, while on the one hand, I believe that, and this is bouncing a lot off of your story, Rachel, of your early experience, that you need to go into community and you need to just do the work, contribute in some way, right? And I do believe you'll get so much more out of that than you get from books. And where that comes from is that I've been an academic and an activist for 30 years. And but I've been doing work in community with women of color on my campus. And I just kind of, I think it was Barbara, you were saying earlier, like you couldn't believe how you just didn't get it. You really didn't get it. And then all of a sudden you have this moment where you're like, oh my God. And I would say it's the same for me. Like I just was skimming the surface, of it. And that's why I just I really value human connection, and I think we can sit around and read a lot, and that's great. But you really have to talk to other people. But on that note, though, the one area where I do think white people really need a lot of help is what not to do. They should have a, that show What Not to Wear. I love that show. So we should have a what not to do show. And it was interesting. I read a thing, something online recently. They did a study. A study was done with um uh I'm not sure if it was black or people of color, but anyways, in the US with activists. And without asking them specifically about white people, they said, what is the thing that is the most exhausting about being an activist? And the answer, without prompt, overwhelmingly, was the biggest drain was white people. That white people are a huge drain on people of color because, and I've seen this happen in my own institution where white people have no problem. There was a great moment where a woman, these women of color were like having this sort of panel that I was hosting on their experiences of racism in the institution. And, a white woman in the audience sort of blurts out like, uh, why is this happening? And and this woman on the panel turned and looked at her with a warm smile. I give her so much credit for that, and looked at her, and I said, and she said that I think the question is why don't you know?
Mm.
And that to me was so, this is kind of what we're speaking to, right? Like why are our eyes not open to what's happening? As you put so clearly, Barbara, like it's just right there. And what are we not seeing? So I think that there is, I guess I would say, take the time to figure out how not to be a person who drains people and adds to the labor that people are already doing just to stay alive, never mind being an activist as well.
I liked on your, I was stalking you on Facebook, Barb, and I saw a list for white people of if you're going to go to demonstrations, what to do, what not to do. I thought it was very, very helpful. Yeah.
I can't take credits. I shared it from somebody else.
I mean, whiteness is invisible.
Eh?
Whiteness is invisible. It's a project. It's invisible that, we all, those of us who are activists have to constantly be reminding ourselves of. And I think that that's one of the things that, the disgusting, brutal murder of George Floyd has just brought to like the fore. It's hard to get the images out of our brains, and it actually is such a reinforcement of the ways in which that brutalization is enacted in our names. And you need to act, or I feel I need, and I think we all do. When you feel like it's not the kind of society where people are treated that way that we want to live in, and we are all connected.
So what this moment is laying bare for everyone to see is that our society depends upon a police state and a carceral system of locking up Indigenous and Black people in order to maintain the white privilege that we and other white people in Canada enjoy. Now, it is, as you say, Amy, it is a scandalous price that other people pay for our privilege. And I guess in listening to you folks talk, what came to me is racism is not a topic. Racism is a lens. Once we white folk, in my own experience, you know how it is that feminism transformed everything. You never thought the same. You never thought anything the same again. Well, unlearning racism is like that. It's like you never see anything ever at all without seeing that there are no people of color there, for example, or that this event too has marginalized people of color in these ways. So that you, well, another way of putting that is, it used to be the case that I always looked around and counted the number of other lesbians in a room. I did it like on automatic. You always knew it was a piece for your own safety. I now automatically drink in whether there are people of color there and who they are and who's missing, and people with disabilities. And I drink in that kind of who's here-ness wherever I go, because it's become a lens. And I think until racism is not a topic for white folk, but a lens and a practice, as you're describing, Amy, then we have something to work with.
I wanted to
Can
add one more.
do the snapping thing here?
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
good. That is a quotable quote. I'm going to use that in my teaching. It's going to be a PowerPoint slide. It's so
Oh, God.
true.
Heaven help us, being turned into a PowerPoint.
Okay, I'm just gonna.
I wanted to add one thing, which is, and I'll send you a link, which is that it's from about 6 days ago now. It's Janaya Future Khan posted a video on Instagram, which is basically to white people, and it embodies, I think, all of the love, generosity, and rage that the 2 videos that you showed. But I also, and in addition, what she talks about is the thousands of people who have been arrested in the protests across the US, and the need for people to understand 2 things. Number one, that the state is going to go after them like, whew, and we need to make sure that there is a defense and that there's bail money. So we need to understand that, just because when we don't see them, being charged and all the rest of that, or we haven't seen all however many thousands there are, but it is really important that there be bail money, and that we keep track of what's going on in terms of the defense. And I mean, the rest of the video is superb and extremely important for every white person to see. I was very moved by it. I'm going to watch it again. I will share it. I will share it with you, and you can share, or we'll get it up on the Facebook, the Allot Facebook page.
Yeah, and I'll add it to our YouTube as well. That's great. So somebody did ask a question, Andrea or Andrea, and I want to share that question with you. And while I'm doing that, I want to say to other folks out there listening that we're going to start to wrap up soon. So if you had any other questions or comments that you wanted to share, please do so now, because we're just delighted to engage with you. So she asked, what allows us to see behind the veils of whiteness? And I think she asked that a while ago, about 10 minutes ago. And I think our discussion really has been about that. But I just wondered if you had anything else you wanted to add to that. What allows us to see behind the veils of whiteness?
Well, I think the current moment is allowing us to see behind the veils of white. I think COVID-19 has laid bare the inequities and the racist inequities of this culture, and then George Floyd and other murders on top of that. I think the veils have been ripped apart, ripped away, and I think that's why this is both a moment filled with horror and grief, and a moment filled with possibility, because things are changing, because we can't pretend at this moment that we don't see what's going on, I think.
And what's interesting is that it took this kind of congruence of these different things like COVID-19 and the incredible way in which it has, as Rachel said, revealed these, gross inequalities along race and class hierarchies. But it's also more than that. I mean, it's the sort of buildup of all the years and years of rage at police brutality and systemic racism within all of the institutions of our society. And it is hard sometimes to think like, well, that it takes, sometimes that's what happens. It takes a spark, and sometimes we don't know what that spark is. But I think that this moment is a moment where that veil of whiteness has been shoved aside. It has been pushed aside, and there are white people who are beginning to feel like they need to not just have that knowledge, not just have empathy, but they need to take action.
Yeah.
And they've never felt that way before.
I would answer that question in a little slightly different way. Well, I think everything that Rachel and Amy have said is true at this moment. What I hear in the question is, how can I learn how to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And that here's what it reminded me of. It reminded me of the very day that my assumption about women who were then applying for legal aid changed. I had assumed that abuse was unusual. And then I assumed it wasn't, that it happened all the time. And that change in my assumption transformed the ways in which I did intake for legal aid for women, because I changed my assumption. So one of the things I think is, well, first of all, Canada is set up on a Charter of Rights and a human rights system that premises racism as something that hardly ever happens. It is unusual, occasional, and remediable by, okay? So against a base of equality. What I would suggest to Andrea is this: assume racism everywhere, all the time. Just assume that it's there. You will find it. If you start with that assumption, instead of starting with the assumption that Canada is a society of equality, you will much more easily be able on an ongoing basis to say, oh yes, here's the racism in this situation and that situation and this institution and yourself and myself.
I just want to add something that's going to sound kind of trivial, I think, but because I think this was set up today to be a conversation amongst white women about what do we do about racism. And I think I just kind of want to emphasize that we need to be having those conversations with each other. And I know I was very ambivalent even about doing this event today. I was like, I don't know if it's the right thing. I don't feel comfortable. I'm not sure. Is my discomfort just the discomfort that one feels when's doing something that's a bit scary? You know, all of that, right? And then I would call Amy and say, Amy, I don't think I want to do this. What do you think? Right? And I'd say, okay, all right. And then I'd be again like, oh, I don't think I want to do it. And then I'd call Amy. and those are the conversations we need to be having with each other, not, why white people are so irritating, right? And not with our Black and people of color friends. So just to emphasize that these are very important conversations that we need to have with each other, and not in a way where anybody elevates themselves as knowing more, being better, being the one who knows how to be anti-racist. We're all figuring it out. We're all committed to it. And so we need to have those conversations in a way that helps each other. Yeah.
Yeah. Bravo. Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, and you know, it's hard to not it to stress that enough. I really feel like we're at a moment where we have been called. We have been called, and I know we've been called before, but these conversations, as much they are going to help. These conversations among white people can help move people. They can help people, give people language. They can help people to figure out, white people, how to move, how to take action, whatever that looks like. um, and we can support each other and not expect that, you know, people of color are going to be the ones that support us. That's, you know,
Mhm.
no, we're not in that situation. You know, I have to say, I've had, in all of the rage and grief that I've been feeling, I've been wanting to not. I've been reaching out to my friends who are, Black and Indigenous and other people of color, and but I haven't wanted to be. I've wanted to express what I'm feeling, but more, I'm just wanting to say I love you, and if you want to talk, and most of them don't want to talk. They're not even at the point of being able to say anything, but they want to know that I'm there. um, and I think that's another piece that's important in this, is how we interact. And so, you know, I've talked to my white friends about, you know, and I've cried with them, and you know, felt that grief. But that's not for me to share in, you know, with people who are already going through all of that 10 times, 20 times, 1,000 times worse. So I think that it's important to remember that in this moment, which is a moment that's going to go on and on and on.
And just as we're kind of concluding, I think I'd like to offer to all the white folk who are watching your innocence certificate.
Yeah.
What I want you to take away from here is this: it is not our fault that we were trained up in a system that is profoundly racist. We are good people. It is not our fault that we were trained to be racist, but it is our responsibility to work against racism.
Mhm.
And both of those things are true.
Yeah. But we do need to pull back the veil on the innocence. We are
Oh,
not. We can no longer be innocent, right?
yeah. In what I want to, when I say an innocent certificate, what I mean to convey is a lot of white folk spend a lot of time worrying about whether or not they are themselves personally racist. The answer is, of course you are.
Yeah.
How could you not be? You got it with we all got it with our Wheaties.
Hmm.
Waste no more time about that. That doesn't mean you're a bad person.
No, it
It
just means you have a booger hanging out of your
it,
nose.
it means you have work to do. Sorry, Amy, what'd you say?
Just means you have a booger hanging out of your
Yeah,
nose
exactly. And a lot of work to do.
and a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do. Boogers to your shoes.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, so for me, the big thing I learned from the big shift that happened for me, when Robin DiAngelo, again, who wrote White Fragility, when she came, was to say exactly the point that you're making there, Barbara, that we're all racist. And it was so liberating because all my adult life, like, I knew I have an ethical and moral responsibility to be anti-racist, but I could feel the racism inside me. Like I would observe myself making judgments of people, around me, and would be horrified by myself. But I felt like I had to live in a constant state of denying that I was racist because I'm a good feminist. And so when she said we're all racist, it was like, oh, thank God, because I am racist, like I do think these things. And it just took that pressure off of that tension that I was always carrying around between, really wanting, like hating the racism in me, but just being able to let that go and say, okay, yeah, and accept that that's a part of me, and then just move on. Right. And a couple of things that I thought of while you were talking, there's that model. I don't know if people have seen it, went around on the internet, of course, of when you have someone who needs care, if they're ill or something, and they're in the middle of the circle, and then it concentrically goes out. So you have their spouse, family, closest friends, and then acquaintances, and then colleagues, and and the idea is that you always dump out. So locate yourself in that. And if you're feeling stressed, so let's say, so Barbara, when you were saying you had cancer, right? So in that instance, you would be in the center of the circle. So I'm like a friend. So if I'm upset about you, or, stressed out because maybe I've been helping and it's getting too much for me, I don't share my feelings in toward the center. I dump out, so away from the center. And that model has really, really, like, my partner also just went through a health crisis, and so that really helped me in not making sure I didn't ever express to him when I was a little bit fed up with whatever. So it's similarly, I think, that model can be usefully applied in this instance, where you're like, oh my God, was that racist? Did I just say something racist? Don't ask, like, your person, a person of color maybe, but dump out, right? Dump your anxieties and your uncertainties and your worries out. That might, I don't know, I'm just thinking that might be a good model to apply in this instance. But the other thing I want to say as a historian, and I'm a little bit reluctant to say this because I don't want to enervate anybody. But I hear all my friends saying, this is a moment and it's a big shift and people are seeing things. But, I'm still dealing with an administration at my university who refuses to recognize that women at home with 3 children cannot sustain a full-time teaching load and shift their courses online. And I shouldn't say this because this is public, but at this point, I don't know if I want to say they refuse to see it, but they're doing nothing about it. So, as a historian with a long view, I'm not that optimistic. But I raise that now because what I want to say to everybody listening is what you do matters, in my opinion. Going out onto the street, joining a march, writing a letter, having a voice. Like, I believe we are seeing now, people speaking out is making a difference. It is. I mean, imagine the courage it took for the police in whichever American city it was who joined the protesters, like, given what we're learning about police culture. So it's work and it takes courage, but do it because, I come out of a social history tradition where we reject the notion of the great man, right? The great, like, any single person made a country. Instead, it's about, social history is about communities. But I live with the tension of teaching students who feel like they can't make a difference. So how do you teach about structural issues, but at the same time say, well, but you do matter as an individual. The one action or the 10 actions or 100 actions you take can make a difference. So I really, you are needed, and your what you do now will, I really, I feel like I'm getting like a preacher now, but I truly believe it really matters. And there's such potential here. So we cannot relax. We cannot trust that other people will do the work. Like, use your voice. You have one. Even if you feel so under-resourced, if you are a white person, you are way better resourced than people of color. So use what you have. Don't exhaust yourself, but use what you have and the voice in the best way you can to be part of this, because there is momentum, but it can be very easily lost. The forces of it, both indifference and, I don't know, hate, not just hate, but also just indifference, or the cluelessness, like the persistent cluelessness. We have to keep pushing. That's my lecture. I told you guys not to lecture, but it's so that I could lecture. I'm the host, so I have to, bookend. But so yeah, Andrea, here she is. So, okay, a couple comments. Stacy says, thank you for this conversation and for being candid about your feelings of rage, grief, and love. and experiences of change and learning, and of learning from fucking up too. Lol. uh, and Nancy Partner wrote, guilt is a kind of privilege. Yes, I think we would all agree with that too, even though it doesn't feel that way, it is. And then finally, Andrea, who wrote earlier about veils of whiteness, said, systems work only through individuals and their choices. And yeah, okay, Andrea, you too are going on a PowerPoint. That is so good. I feel that I don't know, works for me. So I'm going to leave the last word to you all. Final thoughts, responses to anything I've said, or just, yeah, what would you like to say?
Two things.
Yeah.
One is, I don't know if anybody's watching Little Fires Everywhere, but in it, there's a relationship between a very rich white woman and a poor Black woman, which isn't how the book was written, but that's how the screenplay was written, or for the TV series. And in it, the white woman says to the Black woman, we all make choices, referring to the choices that she's made in her life. And Mia, the Black woman, responds by saying, no, you have choices. And I think that is so important, because we have this notion that we live in a society which is a meritocracy, where everybody has choices, and we're all free to make those choices, and it's a level playing field. No, obviously that is not the case. And that's one of the bases upon which I think that a lot of the sort of white innocence around racism exists, which is, well, like, everybody makes choices. Like, well, why did they do that? So I think that's at the core of our learning as white people, is to that sort of notion that we all have choices. It's all free, that we live in a free society. So that's the first thing. And then I guess the last thing is, just went out of my head. So
It'll come back.
It'll come back.
Rachel, did you have any last words you want to share?
I'm going to leave with 3 quotes, because I find quotes very helpful, and there's things that have been sitting with me a lot in the last few days. So one of them, probably both of them, well, maybe all of them I said before, maybe. Anyway, the first one is, white silence is violence. And I think that's true, and I think that's very helpful for us to remember. White silence is violence. The other one I think I said earlier was, read alongside imperfect action. So, like, take action, recognize that it's always imperfect. And then I'm just going to end with a quote from Essie Adesian, I'm not sure which of her books this is from, but she says, but the weight of change shouldn't rest on the shoulders of Black people, and indeed it doesn't. For true systemic shifts to occur, everyone has to feel the disgust and frustration. Everyone has to recognize that the whole underlying structure is so irreparably broken that no one can afford to live like this anymore.
That's from a recent Maclean's issue.
That's right.
Essie Adugin, Sandy Hudson, Desmond Cole, Lawrence Hill. I can't remember everybody, but it's actually really important for people to read that as well. And they were asked, like, the question was, what is your message as Black Canadians to people in the United States? But people used it for all sorts of purposes.
Yeah, no, they're definitely worth reading.
And it was really important. So thank you for reminding us of that piece, Rach.
Barbara?
My quote, which I will mangle because I don't have it in front of me, is, Margaret Mead never doubt that that a few group of committed people cannot change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And so what that to me means is that, and this is in some way an answer to the question that was, what can we do? And white innocence isn't the same as white ignorance. The thing about racism is that it is an institutional structure which is justified by an educational and media structure, and which includes and depends upon the participation of white people to maintain it. And the neat thing about that is it can be interrupted at any one of those points. So if you have a conversation with a white friend about, actually, I wonder if what you just said might be racist. Let's talk about that. If you do a class in which you foreground contributions of folk of color in your tradition, if you talk to your dean or your whatever, for folks who are in, or your boss or your whomever, about racism and the way it operates, if you look at your workplace and it's all white, how did that happen? Every single step you take actually makes a difference, even if at that moment you can't really see it. So that's huge, and that's hopeful. Onward together.
Onward
Yeah.
together.
Onward
Yeah.
together.
And matter of fact, the cut line for the December 9th Coalition, which was a queer group, was working together across our differences for our welcome in the world. And all of those pieces are really important, because unless we recognize our differences and actively work against the ways we oppress each other, liberation will never happen.
Yes.
Thank you
Thank you, folks.
so much. I wanted to tell you that Susan Abbott wrote, "Thank you so much for sharing your experience, wisdom, and deep love." And I want to echo that thanks to all of you. But I especially want to thank everybody out there who's joined us today. I really wish we could see your faces. I know that many of you have stayed for the whole hour and a half, which is incredible. So we really appreciate you being here. If you found what we had to say helpful, let us know. Yeah, Andrea says, "Thanks a lot for this. It was awesome. I've learned so much." And that's what I'm here for, man. I'm learning. So that really fills my heart. I'm so glad for that. This will be archived. It will stay on YouTube. So feel free to share it with your friends. Use it in your teaching, however you want. It's out there for all of you. Zed says, "Thank you all." And with that, I will add my own final thanks so much for being here. And I just want to maybe do a little shout out that both Rachel and Barbara are doing some workshop work coming up soon. So thank you for that, for your work in community to keep this conversation going.
Just quickly, we're having an event on June 11th. People can look it up on Facebook. It's called Activism Under Lockdown, Anti-Colonial and Racial, what's it called exactly? Activism Under Lockdown, Anti-Colonial and Racial Justice in COVID Times. And we have a really, really awesome panel of speakers, including Desmond Cole, but also Yogi Akaraya, Yasmin Hassan, Saeed Hussain, and Courtney Sky. So you can look it up on Facebook and get all the details, but it's next Thursday at 5 o'clock.
Great.
And we're setting up a series of workshops for white folk, which will happen as soon as I get the technological piece together, and will happen over a series of weeks. So folks who are interested in that will find out about it either on my Facebook page or when I get technologically more sophisticated, some other routes.
And I can share it on the Allot page too.
And we're continuing to do work in terms of making the Rise Up archive as representative. And I have to say, I was just scanning slides of mine from a demonstration of the Black Women's Coalition Against Police Brutality and Racism from 1989, after the police shooting of Sophia Cook, which took place just a few weeks after the Montreal massacre. So there's been, there's a long history, and it's important that the activism is documented for all to see.
Great.
So that would be on Rise Up.
Okay.
And
Ah.
thank you, Elise, for pulling this all together.
Yes, thank you,
Yay!
Elise. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Barbara.
Great to talk with you all.